be happy to give it to give some money to the proposed. And then when I say to them, but you know, the economics we all learned together in the classroom says that there's just as good a reason to believe that if that amount of money and that many guarantees had given to the mass of people, money for their homes, guarantee for their debts, to see them through a hard time, the government will guarantee what you owe on your credit card, what you owe. Might that have worked? They look at me. They know that that might have worked too. It just didn't occur to them. And that's a political question. The political forces weren't there to push in that direction. They pushed somewhere else. And but the beauty is, in this country, that that seems normal and reasonable. So that everybody from the New York Times, well, what do you expect? But on over, and I won't mention names, to the left wing in the United States, takes as given and normal what it should never take as given and normal. Something is it's not necessary. None of this was necessary. The productivity of American workers that went up from 1820 to 1970 also went up from 1970 to 2010. For all the first period, the rising productivity helped pay for the rising wages. Why didn't the continuing rising productivity allow continuing rising wages? Because capitalists didn't have to. And the first thing they learn in business school is if you don't have to pay higher wages, don't do it. You get an A if you figure that out. That's what business is. They did what the system has them do. That's why I don't get angry at them. They do what the system has them do. If you're angry at the outcome, your problem is the system. That's why I'm not going to attack Wall Street. I find all of that childish. That's an undeveloped way of understanding what's going on. Wall Street did what Wall Street always does. Main Street, you know, when the wages didn't go up, that was every little business in Boise, Idaho doing it too. All the businesses stopped raising wages. Not the big Wall Street nasties, everybody. And everybody did it because that's how the system works. If you don't have to pay higher wages, you'd be an idiot to do it. You'd go out of business. They knew that. So once the situation changed, once they didn't have to, they stopped. That set in motion everything else, and we're living with the consequences. The consequences of a system that works this way. If we had a different system, it would say, if the workers' productivity is going up, that's the basis for their claim to be given higher wages. End of story. That's a different system. That is a system that organizes a relationship between the production of workers and the pay they get. Doesn't make it subject to market forces because it doesn't want that to happen because of the consequences. Aristotle and Plato wrote about markets 5,000 years ago, right? We're supposed to believe that Aristotle and Plato are somehow the fountains of Western cultures. Pick up Aristotle and Plato and read. They wrote about markets because they had those things there. Plato hated them. Aristotle didn't think much of them, but felt that it was too socially disruptive by that time in Athens to get rid of them. So the compromise was control them. So you get the benefits, and there are some, without all the costs, and there are plenty of those. So the founders of our culture were not enamored of markets. They didn't think markets were the solution, that markets produced efficiency. They made fun of those arguments. That's a later development that requires us to pray to the market as an institution. The people we think we come from intellectually never did this. Yeah?
If the working class credit cards are maxed out, and if the prices are going down, if you got higher employment, and then the Fed gives the money to the banks to lend, and the banks have no one to lend it to, are we in a liquidity trap?
Yeah.
And if they know it, Michael Hudson on Democracy Now! Last week said one of the purposes of QE2 was to provide money to actually go buy up assets in other countries, and that's one of the fears. Do you believe that's
No, Mr. Hudson is often given to dramatic projections. No, I think the liquidity trap, by the way, a very simple idea, basically invented by John Keynes in the 1930s, because he already noticed then that there are circumstances in which, when the monetary authority produces money and throws it into the banking system, the banking system can't find anybody to lend it to. That the depression of the business community is so enormous that they're not going to borrow no matter how much money there is, no matter how low the interest rates. It's just too risky. There's just such a bad scene out there that they're not going to get caught doing it. At that point, you get what's called a liquidity trap, in the sense you keep pumping more and more money in, but it doesn't have any end result. It just sits in the bank because the banks can't find anyone to lend it to, and that's considered, a trap that you've fallen into and you can't kind of get out of it. If some of this money then leaves the United States and goes out to buy assets in other parts of the world, that doesn't change the liquidity trap, because that means nothing changes here. And it would be a wrinkle on that kind of thing. But whether or not that's going to happen, I'm not so clear. I think that in the United States, there is now a perception that is shaking the business community, and it has for about a year and a half, and that is, or 2 years. Americans are not used to seeing an economic crisis born, developed, and worse here than anywhere else. If you remember the earlier crisis, the Asian crisis in 1997, the crisis in Russia when the ruble collapsed, the crisis in Mexico 10 or 15 years ago, we've had a series of crises that are known for the countries over there where they began. This crisis is ours. It explodes here, it develops here, it was produced here, and it's the worst here. I mean, not as bad as Mexico, but worst of the developed part of the world. And that is shaking Americans. And Americans are very frightened and upset. They don't know how to handle this. And that includes people in the highest rungs of the investment community. And I think for many of them, they have become believers in something called decoupling. That is, that they used to believe that the United States, what happened here is what would happen everywhere else. And they're now beginning to see that it doesn't necessarily have to go that way. And there's a rush to invest in the less developed world, the up-and-coming world, the new places like China and India. Very exciting, because they don't seem to be in the hole that we're in. And so they have become, but we've had that many times in the history of capitalism, an infatuation with Argentina, or an infatuation with Africa, or an infatuation with China. That's happened also several times. So I'm a little dubious about it, but at least for the time being, there's a movement of investing into the third world, into the less developed countries, because they seem to have found a way, by producing and selling to China and so on, to escape this crisis. And so there's an attraction for them. But I don't think it's a conspiracy so much. I don't think that American companies are going to do more in the way of producing in those places. The big places for Americans to go to have already been defined. They're China, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but they're China and India. And the growth is there. China for producing, and India for more skilled white-collar work, because of the language and so forth. The Indians are going to be the place where outsourcing is done. And you can see that Obama, all due respect, who is in India, or was in India for the last few days, is really going out of his way to smooth and improve that, because American corporations in huge numbers have plans, have already done it, but they have huge plans, much larger than what's happened already, to outsource middle-level technical work to India. There are I don't mean to frighten you. There are millions of Americans going to college, learning skills for which there will be no jobs. They cannot compete. The Indians, insurance companies in the United States are beginning to organize that. I think I told you this story. If you get sick, you need an operation. The insurance company will come to you and say, we covered your operation. We will pay for it. Here's your ticket. You're going to say, what? Here's your ticket. Your leg will be redone in New Delhi. We're going to cover the operation there. We're going to fly you from New York to New Delhi. We're going to put you up in a first-class hotel. You will be operated by a surgeon who was trained at Johns Hopkins University Medical School. You'll have a recovery for 3 days and we'll fly you home. And the reason the insurance company will do that is that the overall cost of having you operated that way is 1/4 of what it would be in a hospital 2 miles from your home. That's the way it is. And that we are at the beginning of that process. And that's going to produce a downward pressure on American wages and American salaries. And there's a sense, I get it mostly when I meet with businessmen and women, which I do from time to time here in New York. I get a sense, which I've never had before in my life, that the growth, they're all focused on growth. Where's the market going to grow? It's almost everywhere but here. There's a sense of it's over here. It's just, now that may pass. But for the time being, this crisis has had as many crises have had in the past. You know, most cultural historians of the United States will tell you that we're still living out the legacy of the Great Depression. One of the reasons Americans went into the consumer frenzy after World War II was because of the shock of having those 10 years of depression followed by 6 years of World War II when you couldn't buy stuff and you couldn't fix your house and when finally you could, all this accumulated sense of being deprived needed an outlet. And so these crises have a way, particularly when they last like this one does, of leaving long-lasting psychological scars and legacies. And there's something going on in the United States in which the upward and onward optimism that characterized this country for so long is being fundamentally questioned. It's kind of the anxiety that it's over. I get it, you know, I'm a professor. I spend an awful lot of my time with young people aged 17, 18, into their 20s. The level of pessimism about their job prospects and their whole life situation that I get now is really different from what I've had in the past. The comment that I'm not going to be able to live at the standard of living of my parents is now normal. The debts that they're accumulating to get through school, the number of people my age who have children, a little bit older than me, who have children in their 20s and 30s, and are slowly realizing that they're going to have to financially help those children forever. If they want them to live nearby, then they have to pay a rent. When we figure it all out, they can't earn with education. They can't do it. They can't do what our generation was able to do. The truth of it is, for those of you that might be interested, when I went to college and graduate school, I never worried about my job. I just assumed, oh, I'm going to college.